Hi, welcome back. We're back online. We are ready for our next session, which is a session on coming to national and regional strategies on hydrogen. So I'd like to introduce Carla Robledo, Senior Policy Officer at the Netherlands Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Policy, who will guide us through the next session. Carla.
Hi, thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to everybody joining us today. As Karen mentioned, my name is Carla Robledo. I'm a policy officer at the ministry, and I am currently working in the hydrogen team at the ministry and have contributed to the development of the Dutch hydrogen strategy. So for which today I'm delighted to be moderating today's panel discussion on coming to national and regional strategies for hydrogen. So today we have a really amazing panel composed by Fulton from the United States, Sabrina Russell from Canada, and Jörg Gigler from the Netherlands. Just for the audience to know a bit what to expect in the coming half hour, the panelists will each be giving a 10-minute presentation. And afterwards, we will have all together also a brief discussion with some questions. So I will be kickstarting the conversation by asking the panelists a couple of questions. And just that being said, I would like to go and start with the first presentation of Mr. Fulton. I will give a brief introduction of him. Louis has worked internationally in the field of transport, energy, and environment analysis and policy developments for 30 years. He's director of the Sustainable Transportation Energy Pathways Program and the Energy Futures Program within the Institute of Transportation Studies at the University of California, Davis. There, he leads a range of research activities around new vehicles, technologies, and new fuels. He was a lead author on the recent IPCC Fifth Assessment Report Mitigation, and current projects include analysis of electric vehicles, shared mobility, automatization, and other drivers of transportation futures. He investigates the cost, energy, greenhouse gas emissions, employments, and other aspects of changing transportation trends and alternative futures. In the past, he has worked in the International Energy Agency in Paris, the UN Environmental Program, and the US Department of Energy, and has taught at the Independent University of Bangladesh and University of Maryland. So Louis has received his PhD in energy management and environmental policy from the University of Pennsylvania in the United States in 1994. So quite impressive. And Louis, the floor is all yours to begin.
Thank you very much, Carla, for that long introduction. I'm going to have to start sending shorter bios. But anyway, thanks very much. And I'm excited to be part of this today. It's very interesting. Unfortunately, due to my own technical issue, I didn't hear Sunita's comments, but I think I know the kinds of things she would have said, so I'm going to try to play off that a little bit and talk about mostly what's happening in California. I work at the University of California at Davis. We work a lot with the state government, like the California Air Resources Board and California Energy Commission, and everyone is working very hard now on figuring out how we can decarbonize, all activities within the state, and in particular, for me anyway, transportation-related activities. And you can see here on this first slide that we have now got coded, regulatory targets to achieve a carbon-neutral system across all activities by 2045. And also specifically a 100% renewable electricity sector by 2045. And I think these are critical, and they're going to drive all of our efforts in the coming years. We also have strong requirements to reduce vehicle pollutant emissions, and that is consistent with these and also drives a lot of the policymaking. But I just want to report that now on the transportation side in the state, we've got a bunch of different rules and programs that are making things happen. One, we've had this for a while. 15% of sales of light-duty vehicles have to be zero emission or ZEV by 2025. But actually, if I go to the bottom bullet now, that's been extended to 100% by 2035 by the Governor Newsom. About a month ago, he issued that executive order. So The Air Resources Board is now very focused on trying to figure out how that can be achieved, and I'm involved in a statewide study of that as well. It also requires that trucks and buses, well, buses will have to be zero emission in terms of sales by 2030, and trucks are targeted for full stock-wide zero emission by 2045, although there's a sort of feasibility clause there. But basically, the entire road transportation system is targeted to be decarbonized by 2045. We also have requirements that truck manufacturers start introducing zero emission trucks, and there is a rule in play being developed that commercial fleets will have to adopt zero emission vehicles starting in 2023 or 24. So there's just so many things happening. And then on the fuel side, we have the low carbon fuel standard that requires decarbonization of our fuels on average for transportation, reaching 20% reduction by 2030. I fully expect that reduction to continue, that we'll keep pushing downward on the carbon intensity of fuels, and that will also drive electrification and a movement to hydrogen. So the question here is, where does hydrogen fit? There's no clear angle on any of this that specifically focuses on hydrogen, but hydrogen and fuel cell vehicles are zero emission, and they will be incentivized by this along with electric vehicles. Next slide. So I'm having a little trouble seeing those, but I've got my own slides here. Since about 2015, so let's focus on what California is doing related specifically to a hydrogen future. And California has been spending a lot on infrastructure and other hydrogen projects, and it comes out to an expected spend of about $230 million by the end of 2023. A lot of that is incentives and direct investment in vehicles and refueling stations. There's around 7,500 fuel cell vehicles on the road in the state, mostly light duty, but also quite a few buses. And we have a station target. We should have about close to 45 maybe stations in service at the end of this year, maybe 70 by the end of next year, and a target of 100 by 2025. And California Energy Commission is going to be investing and supporting that strongly over the next few years. We've got, as I mentioned, the ZEV sales mandates for cars and trucks. And I think there's generally, I don't think this is coded anywhere, but there's generally a target of about 50,000 fuel cell vehicles over the next 4 years, going up from 7,000. So that's quite aggressive. And then the California Fuel Cell Partnership has an aspirational target of 1 million fuel cell vehicles by 2030 and 1,000 stations by 2030. That, as you can imagine, that would require a very strong ramp up from about 2025. Next slide. This is all great, and it's triggering a lot of action. We're seeing a lot of announcements about vehicles and about hydrogen projects, and we're expecting to see a lot of investment. But is what we have enough? Are the policies that we have in place enough yet to get us to those kinds of targets? And it is true that fuel cell vehicle sales are slow right now. I mean, it's a COVID year. But we do expect this to recover after COVID. I'll come back to that point in a minute. We're beginning to see truck models. Some of them are demonstration, but we're getting announcements of commercial truck hydrogen fuel cell models coming along. We don't see clear market drivers for buying those cars and trucks yet, apart from an incentive for light duty vehicles. We're going to probably need more purchase incentives, and we're probably going to need to help fleets afford these vehicles. They're going to be more expensive than diesel trucks for a while, probably for 5 to 10 years. And so we're going to have to figure out how to make them affordable. And we're going to need education. We're going to need to raise awareness of this technology. And when vehicles become available, we need to make sure that customers know about it. I think the fleet purchase requirements will be useful, but they may be dominated by battery electric trucks for a while. So we just have to make sure there's a place for fuel cell trucks in there. And as I said, we really need to get to competitive prices for fuel cells and hydrogen. And I realize I only have a couple of minutes left, so let's quickly go through the next slide, please, is from the California Air Resources Board, and it shows us what they expect to see happen. This isn't just a target, but this is based on their conversations with manufacturers and fleets about what they expect to see happen, and they fully see the potential for reaching about 50,000 vehicles on the road by 2026. Next slide. We know that we're going to have to bring the cost of hydrogen down, and this is one of the really big challenges. Probably Sunita mentioned this. Right now, the cost of hydrogen per kilogram is fairly high. It's over $10 a kilogram. We would really like to see it get down to 7 or less by 2030. And if you hit the enter there, you'll get a circle that shows what that looks like a little bit. And if we can get down below 7, I think we're going to see a lot of demand for hydrogen through vehicles, and of course from other sectors. I'm not really talking about other sectors at this point, but we could discuss that. And then I'll just mention, I'm going to make this next one my last slide. We're involved in developing scenarios, and the red line in this figure is a scenario that is kind of our base fuel cell vehicle scenario, where we would get up to around 200,000 vehicles sold per year by 2030. That's in a market with 1.5 to 2 million vehicles a year. So it's still only maybe 10 to 15% of the market. And that seems to be a kind of role for fuel cells that a lot of people envision, with most of the rest of it being electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles, or plug-in hybrids. But the yellow line shows a much more expanded role for fuel cells that we're looking into and we think is possible. But as you can see, it takes a really big increase after 2030. And so it's all part of building up a large-scale hydrogen system in the state, where we would have large-scale production. We would probably be getting into pipeline movement of hydrogen, large stations, high-capacity stations, and many other things. So understanding what that looks like and how to get there, I think, is really one of the key challenges at this point. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you for these insights on developments in California and the future developments. Now Sabrina Russell will be presenting. She's a principal and co-founder of Kzen Clean Energy Solutions, a boutique Vancouver-based consulting firm specializing in hydrogen and fuel cells. She has over 23 years experience working in the hydrogen sector in both technical and commercial roles. Sabina leads Kzen's project management branch with a focus on consortium-based projects deploying zero-emission technologies and infrastructure, with active projects spanning for the full hydrogen value chain. She has led the Kzen's work to develop the hydrogen strategy for Canada on behalf of the Government of Canada, and recently contributed to regional hydrogen studies for the Maritimes and British Columbia. So prior to joining Kzen, Sabina was with Ballard Power System for 18 years developing fuel cell products, and finished her time there as Director of Product Engineering. With this, Sabina, I would like to give you the word for your presentation.
Great, thank you very much, Carla, and it's a real pleasure to be here today. I think Carla did a great job of introducing who Kzen is. So we're a BC-based company. We've been around for 5 years. And I'm going to talk today mostly about the work we do on the strategy side of things. So starting with the federal strategy, and then a little bit on some of the regional strategy work. And I just want to add that, you know, at Kzen, our real mission is also to develop projects, get funding, and manage them, because we really believe in the importance of getting the technology out there. So our strategy work is really informed by this boots on the ground knowledge of the technologies and what it takes to develop a vibrant hydrogen economy. Next slide. So in terms of the hydrogen strategy for Canada, it is a very long awaited federal strategy to be released. We're really hoping this week or next week. It's out of our hands at this point. It's really going to depend on timing for the government. It's all approved and done. It's really been in development for the past 3 years, starting with stakeholder engagements. And Kzen came on board in March of this year to really synthesize, do some additional modeling work in the context of a net zero future, and you know, write it into a cohesive strategy that looks at the whole value chain of hydrogen in Canada, from production to distribution and storage to end use, both for our own domestic market and for the export market. And I just wanted to highlight a recent quote by our Honorable Minister Seamus O'Regan, who quoted Wayne Gretzky. We love to quote our Canadian hockey players. And I can't see the screen, it's so small, but basically what it says is hydrogen is where the puck is going. And so what that really means is we have our energy system today. We know it needs to be radically transformed to meet a net zero future. And hydrogen is really where we need to be looking as a key part of the piece of the puzzle. So next slide. So in terms of regional studies, we have a lot of great work going on across Canada. And so some of the provinces have developed very detailed studies to look at the opportunity and in the process of releasing a government written roadmap like BC and Alberta. Zen actually just worked with the maritime provinces to develop a very deep technical study looking at opportunities there. Again, eventually that'll become a roadmap. So a lot of good work happening at the provincial level as well as the national level. And that's where we really define clear opportunities for production and end use based on local factors, because Canada is a huge country, very diverse, very different energy feedstocks province to province. Next slide. So why hydrogen in Canada? I mean, the first thing I want to say is really hydrogen discussion today is around decarbonization, and that's what it needs to be. I think the world is starting to become laser focused on the urgent need to decarbonize to mitigate climate change, and Canada recognizes that as well. And particularly energy-rich countries like Canada and the Netherlands and the US that have traditionally really relied on oil and gas. We need to look at new energy vectors that are not carbon containing, and hydrogen is a great option for that. We think Canada is very, very well positioned. So the map on this slide shows, by province where we see the main production pathway potential, and it's a real mix. I'll talk a bit more about that. But, Canada is very blessed. We are energy rich. We have a range of feedstocks from a very clean, low carbon intensity electricity grid that's very hydro dominant, to a very large natural gas sector. We have a strong innovation sector here, and we have a head start. We produce and use a lot of hydrogen today for oil and gas upgrading. And we really think the benefits of developing this hydrogen economy in Canada will go far beyond the environmental benefits. So obviously decarbonization, key driver, but clean air in our urban centers and zero emission transport is very important as well. And really hydrogen can lead to a lot of economic growth opportunities for Canadian business. Next slide. And I just want to say, Canada is not starting from zero. We actually have a lot of activities happening across the country in regions like British Columbia and Quebec, where we also have a ZEV mandate similar to California, and we've learned a lot from California. We're seeing infrastructure development. I drive a fuel cell car, so we see, cars on the road. At places like Alberta, we're looking more towards decarbonization of heating and heavy duty trucking. So the spin is a little bit different in different regions, but there's great activities happening across the board. Next slide. So in terms of production, there's a great debate out there about green versus blue and what's going to matter. And each country has to look at their own unique needs. When we look at Canada, the scale of hydrogen that we're going to need to decarbonize and achieve net zero by 2050, it's enormous. The amount of hydrogen we could need, we realize we need to develop all of our low carbon intensity pathways. And we look at our feedstocks, we recognize that both electrolytic hydrogen from renewables like hydropower and wind, and blue hydrogen, where we use fossil fuel feedstocks and capture the carbon and sequester it, those will both be very important. So what we're going to be focused on is the carbon intensity of the hydrogen, and of course, always the cost. And so if we're too limiting in the pathways, what we could do is unfairly hinder the hydrogen economy in the early days, and by just focusing on the higher cost pathways. So we're going to be developing both in Canada. And over time, it'll shift to look both at carbon intensity and the renewable nature of the feedstock. Next slide. So how will hydrogen be used? I mean, we all break it into different buckets, but very similar to the Netherlands and to the US. You know, we really see hydrogen as very versatile in that it can be used directly as a fuel in hard to abate sectors like transportation, heavy duty trucking, can be used as a fuel in fuel cells for fuel production as well. You get a good efficiency bump when you use hydrogen in a fuel cell, but you can always burn it directly as well to produce low carbon heat for industry and the built environment. And then of course, hydrogen is a very important feedstock for some of our big industry. So in Canada, we really see all those applications are going to play an important role. Next slide. So, you know, how much hydrogen do we think we're going to need in Canada? There's a lot more about this in the strategy, but what I can say now is if you look at where we are today and you look at how our energy is delivered and in what forms in Canada, we still have a very, very heavy reliance on fossil fuels. So, you know, natural gas, refined petroleum products, but even our electricity that's delivered today, a lot of it is generated from coal and natural gas, less and less over time, but still about 80% of our energy today is derived from some form of fossil fuel. And when you look at a carbon net zero future, we did a lot of modeling of different scenarios that looks at economics and technology. And really the opportunity for hydrogen to close the gap is going to be 20 to 30% of our delivered energy in Canada. And that is huge. It's about 3,000 petajoules a year based on today's energy demands. So when you think about that scale, that's part of what's driving our looking at all the different pathways. Next slide. So, you know, we have a lot of key players across the value chain here in British Columbia, and I'm including Alberta as well, because those are kind of the Western provinces that we're talking to the Consulate General of the Netherlands about and collaboration opportunities. And we see a lot of great synergies between what we're doing here in Canada and what's happening elsewhere. And international collaborations will only help accelerate things. I'm just going to jump a couple slides because I know I'm out of time here. So next slide. We're identifying a few areas of potential collaboration. We're going to be doing a report that shows specifically where we think there's synergies between Canada and the Netherlands. And they're really bucketed into, you know, infrastructure development and common areas, technology, and also codes and standards and policies. And we think that in all three of those areas, there's great opportunity to collaborate. And can you just skip forward to there, Karen? Okay, so just finally, you know, I think I want to just end by saying, and we should have included the US in here, I apologize for that, but we've been looking specifically at opportunities for Canada and the Netherlands to collaborate. And we have a lot in common, actually, our two countries. You know, we both have an urgent need to decarbonize. We have a very strong oil and gas sector. We have a history of innovation and a history of collaborating and investing in each other's opportunities in the past. And so we really do believe that hydrogen is the next big way we can work together. And we're very excited for all the different opportunities. So thanks very much, Carla.
Thank you, Sabina. And then last but not least, our very own Jörg Gigler from the Netherlands will be presenting. Jörg has been working on sustainability and innovation for more than 25 years, the last 14 years focusing on the role of the gas industry in the energy transition. Currently, he's director of the Dutch New Gas Innovation Team, also known as DKI New Gas, working on hydrogen, power to gas, biomethane, geoenergy, and carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Jörg has held different positions in consultancy, the gas industry, and at governments, and he's a regular speaker at courses and conferences about sustainability, innovation, and energy transition. Since April 2013, Jörg is also a self-employed consultant focusing on energy, sustainability, and innovation. He holds different positions as board members in organizations focusing on energy and innovation, and he studied agriculture engineering at Wageningen University, where he obtained a PhD in agricultural science. Please, Jörg, you can now begin with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Carla, for your kind introduction. And may I have the first slide, please? Good morning and good evening to everyone. And it's a great pleasure for me to join you here today. I just came rushing in from a workshop with Belgium, so it's my International Monday today. The first slide, please. All right. What I would like to present first to you is the government strategy on hydrogen and its philosophy. In the next slide, I will go into a bit more detail on the strategy itself. But what this philosophy does is It recognizes the need for hydrogen to achieve full decarbonization. So we can not only do it by electrifying all our uses. The second thing is that the systemic role of hydrogen is recognized. So it's not only to decarbonize markets, but also to create flexibility and storage in our energy system in order to be able to have a reliable system in the future. We do not make a choice yet for green or blue hydrogen, so we recognize that both will be needed, and also that the energy transition offers economic opportunities for companies and the whole innovation community. And last but not least, and that's why I'm so happy that I'm in this workshop, is we can only do this when we collaborate internationally. Without that, we just can't make it because the challenge is too big. The next slide, please. So what is this government strategy all about? First is that it's focusing on, the policy agenda is focusing on the things that are typically done by governments, which is legislation and regulation. And this sounds, of course, this sounds very boring, but this is a crucial part. If this is not in place, it's a huge showstopper. The second thing is that this policy agenda also recognizes that cost reduction and scaling up of green hydrogen is necessary in order to make it, to get it to a competitive scale. The third one is that hydrogen can be used in different end user markets. So it's in the industry, it's in mobility, it's in the built environment, it's in the electric sector, and also in agriculture. And what share it will be exactly, we don't know yet, but I think it's a no-brainer that probably in passenger cars, it will be a much smaller share, while in heavy trucks, it's sort of the only option. And then the last thing is supporting and flanking policy is necessary, like what we're doing today, to have an international strategy, but also to look at safety, to look at how can we get international funds, etc. So next slide, please. We also drafted an innovation roadmap for hydrogen, and this is a short summary of that innovation roadmap. We said what first is needed is that we go from vision, because we have many, many visions, to policy making to support that vision. And that's in place now. We're only at the start, but I think we have a very good start. The second thing is that we need demonstration projects, because only when we demonstrate it in real world applications, we are able to show what we can do and to actually offer a new future to consumers, to the public. The third one is that we have to create the required conditions. It's legislation, it's finance, but it's also physical, like infrastructure and standards and quality issue. That was already mentioned by Sabina. The fourth issue is we need long-term R&D. Why? Because we can do more with hydrogen than just simply putting it into a car. We can also make synthetic fuels. We can make industrial feedstock out of it. So we need more R&D to make sure that we develop those options. And the last thing is, well, they're sort of conditions, but we call them supporting activities. We need the industry workforce to do the work in the future. We need to make sure that there's societal acceptance so that we can go ahead with hydrogen. And the last one is some conclusions. If I can have that slide, please. First of all, I think the good news is that governments, they recognize the need for a good strategy for hydrogen, not only in the Netherlands, but more importantly, and I think that especially for our friends from the US and Canada, this is important to realize, what we do is usually determined in Europe. So this strategy is fully supported by a European hydrogen strategy that is very, very ambitious, and that's the good news. The innovation strategies that we need are also there, and they're also backed by Europe. So we have a Dutch strategy, a German strategy, a French strategy. In Belgium it's in place, and that will help us to get this all done. What we also see is that many projects, there are many project plans, but the next thing that we need to do is to turn those plans into real projects. So we have enough paper. Now it's time to start with the project, and we have some projects arising already In the Netherlands, we counted more than 100 initiatives, but we have to go faster and we have to go bigger. And that's our next challenge that we need to do. And what we also see is that this is not only something that's being done between researchers. Now, companies are really interested to join us in this challenge. So I think the next thing is what we have to do is really to go from large piles of paper to a large amount of projects. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Jörg, and thank you to all the panelists for keeping the time sharp. You make my job easy, and as well for providing these wonderful insights. I know a lot of things and projects are happening in all 3 countries, so it's very hard to make a summary, but you have done this wonderfully. And maybe we can start with the first question. So the US and the Netherlands have come to a multi-sector hydrogen strategy. Canada is just about to release their national strategy, very exciting. Maybe, Jörg, you can tell us what was the push for having this strategy, more political or coming from the stakeholders, the market, and maybe we can also hear after Jörg the reaction of Sabina to let us know how it compares with Canada.
Yes, thank you, Carla. That's a good question, and I think that the push has come from both sides. First of all, it has come from industry because industry saw the opportunities that that hydrogen offer, and maybe not so much the industries, but the regions where the industries are situated in. They are looking for a new perspective, a perspective away from fossil fuels and embracing renewables. So I think that was the first part. The second part was that we have a climate agreement in the Netherlands that was closed about 1.5 years ago. That climate agreement says, if we want to achieve our Paris targets, then we have to go to minus 49%, and that's probably going to change to minus 55% CO2 emission reductions in 2030. And we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. At least that's our ambition. And I think that those 2 ingredients have made that we realized we do not only have to make our electricity consumption more sustainable, but we also have to look at the molecules, which are at the moment 80% of our energy use. And what we've seen is that to go from electricity to molecules, we need electrolyzer technology. And that's actually the bridge to get from this somewhere nearly infinite potential of renewable energy from solar and wind to molecules. So I think that those 3 ingredients are the most important drivers for hydrogen.
Thank you, Jörg. Sabina, do you identify in the Canadian strategy? Do you see some differences?
Yeah, just in terms of your question about, push versus pull, or who was asking for the strategy, it's been in development for a long time, and I think it was simmering away without a lot of urgency for a period of time. And wow, did that ever change in 2020? I think that we're seeing government recognizing we know we need to be net zero by 2050, but we don't know how to get there. There's a gap. We can directly electrify, we can, improve efficiency, we can develop biofuels, but there's a gap. And so what part of that gap can hydrogen fill? And it can do more than fill a gap. I mean, it can really be 30% of our energy system. And once we recognize that importance, I think government's very keen to get it out. It's a very important pathway for our oil and gas sector to play an important role in a net zero future. And we need that pathway. It's a key economic driver for our country. But then provincially, similar to what Jörg said, our regions across Canada are saying we need a federal vision here because we recognize the importance and we're developing our own individual, but how do we work together? How do we develop infrastructure that spans our country? So provinces are pulling, and certainly industry is pulling. We have a big hydrogen and fuel cell sector here in Canada that's exporting a lot of our technology today. And we don't have enough key at-scale reference projects here in Canada to highlight our technology and capability. And also we just don't have enough projects that span the value chain to get us where we need to be, for deployment by 2050. So there's pull in every direction right now. I get asked every day, many times, when's the strategy coming out? And so I think, everyone's excited to see that federal vision.
Thank you. Yes, we're all excited and looking forward to it. So thank you. And maybe, Louis, I can ask you about California's strategy, because it has been mainly pushed by transportation developments and vehicle emission standards. How does it relate to the national hydrogen strategy? And do you see other sectors also being interested in hydrogen in California?
Yeah, thanks. I realize, I admit that my talk was pretty focused on transportation, and in California, transportation really does have a leadership role. But of course, we're thinking about all the sectors. We're thinking about a hydrogen system here, and how do you scale up in a very synthesized way the demand and the supply side across different sectors. And it's quite a ballet to try to grow the demands. You've got chemicals, you've got refining in this state. There's a lot of other large scale stationary users, large industrial facilities and hospitals and other kinds of facilities. And so the state is certainly looking at how to coordinate all of that. And of course, also wanting to coordinate nationally. And that's been happening. But I think with the new administration coming in the United States, it's a very exciting time for improved coordination, and for some sense that California, isn't trying to go it alone, and maybe being impeded from going it alone is kind of the feeling that we've had over the last few years. Now I think there's going to be tremendous cooperation, and of course it is at the national level where we need that big vision, and we're getting that big vision on scaling up a hydrogen system around the country. For example, a lot of the larger production opportunities will probably be outside of the state of California. They might be in Utah or Nevada. And we need to understand how to build that system. We will produce some hydrogen in the state. We do. We have large scale facilities where we've got a lot of electrolyzer capacity coming in. But we need to think beyond the state borders. So I think over the next few years, we're going to really see a terrific level of planning and a cooperative effort across the whole country. And of course, it has to be internationally. We do have ground borders with Canada, so let's work on that. I mean, we're still a few years off, but we probably need to start thinking about how you move hydrogen between the countries. And then just on a planning basis, I think it's true that all the countries that are prioritizing hydrogen have to cooperate and learn from each other. There's going to be so many learning experiences that we can transfer.
Thank you. And maybe related to that point about international collaboration, we will have then an internal domestic market for clean hydrogen productions for green and blue, but also we would have export and imports. So what is the view on these relative priorities for developing a domestic market versus an export market in each of your countries? So maybe I would like to ask Louis to start, and then Jörg and Sabina can also react.
I don't have a strong answer on that one. I think it's got to have to be a strong domestic priority for a while. We need to build up the markets here and serve them. There could be opportunities to produce hydrogen for export, and that's kind of a private enterprise thing. I'm not sure to what extent we can expect to see that, but I certainly hope that we prioritize building a strong national system.
Thank you. Jörg?
Yes, I think it's a complicated question. I think we need to develop both. Like, we need to develop a domestic market, domestic production. Why? Because hydrogen is also serving the purpose of system flexibility, storage, system security. So if we don't have our own hydrogen system or our own hydrogen production, then we're going to miss that system function of hydrogen. So I think that that's a strong plea that we need hydrogen. But if you look at the energy consumption, not only in the Netherlands, but I think in Northwest Europe, then we will never be self-sufficient. So we do need import to supply all the energy, basically all the hydrogen in what forms however, to fully supply our markets, to actually saturate the need for hydrogen. So I think it's both, and we see both happening at the moment. So we see a lot of interest from offshore wind energy because they're situated very close to the North Sea, so we can use that potential on the one hand. And on the other hand, we're looking at partners in, for example, South Europe, but also Northern Africa, and even further than that. There are even studies going to South America and to Southern Africa to see how we can source more hydrogen, renewable hydrogen from those areas. So I'd say it's end-to-end.
Right, thank you. Maybe Sabina can tell us a sneak preview how this topic is treated in the national strategy.
Sure, yeah, it's a good segue from Jörg because Canada wants to do both, except we want to be the exporter to Europe and to Asia. But we see both. The domestic market is critical for our own decarbonization, and I think we have to prioritize the development of an at-scale domestic market first. But we have to be thinking about export now because it takes time. It takes time to develop the infrastructure to move the hydrogen to our coasts, to put it into a form that can be energy dense and transported, by sea to Europe and Asia, and also by land. We have visions of a pipeline down to California and working with our US partners to really trade hydrogen as a new energy commodity. So I think we'll focus on domestic first, but we really are already starting to talk to a number of international governments that are looking at Canada because they recognize we know how to export energy, we have a lot of energy, and we have a lot of potential to make hydrogen.
Thank you. And well, we have a lot of other nice, interesting questions, but given the time, I think we should wrap up. So it was a pleasure to have this interesting discussion and hear about the developments in 3 countries. Thank you, Sabina, Lewis, and Jörg, for your presentations. I hope also the audience had the opportunity to learn new insights. And as well, also thank you to the host and organizing for providing this great platform to allow this discussion. We really need to strengthen the international collaborations. So this is a wonderful example on how we can do this. With this, I would like to close the panel discussion and go back to Karen. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Carla, for a fabulous session, and thank you to our speakers. That was really interesting and food for thought for sure. Thank you all for joining us. We had a little bit of a technical adjustment earlier, so we are live on the platform now. If you missed the session before this one, it will be recorded and posted as soon as possible. So thank you all. We're going to break for a little bit of a video message from the Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Policy from the Netherlands, Erik Wiebes, who will share with us his thoughts on the hydrogen transition. So we'll wait for that.
I would like to address 2 topics today: what we need for hydrogen policies at this stage and the role the Netherlands wants to play in the development of an international hydrogen market. The essential role of hydrogen for decarbonization is widely acknowledged. Now we have to focus on making clean hydrogen affordable and upscaling and accelerating deployment. Governments, of course, have a key part to play in this. Governments are responsible, amongst others, for developing a long-term vision that offers investors certainty, for creating financial instruments, for stimulating innovation and investment, and introducing regulations and standards for well-functioning domestic and international markets. And that's a big challenge. The hydrogen market is different from existing energy markets, such as electricity or natural gas. And we cannot simply copy existing frameworks. What's more, the clean hydrogen market is only just starting to take shape. We should be careful about introducing regulations that could disrupt its progress. At this stage, the focus should be on removing barriers and on supporting pioneer projects and helping them scale up. I would also like to stress the need for government to invest in R&D and innovation to bring costs down quickly. The Netherlands published its hydrogen strategy earlier this year, as did a number of other European countries, such as France, Germany. And I'm happy to say that we've started implementing a European hydrogen strategy. The creation of an international market is a key theme in our approach. So I welcome the hydrogen energy ministerial discussion about a global framework and applaud other organizations like the International Energy Agency for supporting and strengthening this international dialogue. As governments, we have this shared challenge, but we all start from a different background, and that brings me to my second topic. As for where the Netherlands is coming from, I can be clear. The Netherlands has the potential and ambition to be a major hydrogen hub within the global market, just as we are for other energy carriers. We have an extremely well-developed gas infrastructure. We have substantial storage capacity. We have big ports like Rotterdam. We have major demand from heavy industry and huge potential for offshore wind power. And based on our national hydrogen strategy, we're now drafting and implementing hydrogen policies. Because the market is still in its infancies, I'm putting in place appropriate financial support scheme for innovation, demonstration, scale up. And I would like to highlight two priorities in our hydrogen policy. We're investing how to repurpose part of our national gas infrastructure for hydrogen transport, existing infrastructure for hydrogen. And this hydrogen backbone would connect all the major industrial hubs in the Netherlands and possibly in Northwest Europe. Using a highly cost-effective infrastructure in this way can help green our industry. We're also working on a combined approach to the expansion of offshore wind in the North Sea on one hand and the scaling up of hydrogen production capacity on the other hand. For example, through combined tenders. This would strengthen the business cases of offshore wind farms and helps us integrate more renewable energy into our energy system and into our economy. Next year, we will share our progress on these topics with you. But first, I look forward to learning from everybody present today. Thank you.